than the men should. So again, the question is, why is there a need for us to separate in the way that we relate the Torah to men and women? And maybe more importantly, why is this the first point made by Hashem to Moshe in the process of the giving of the Torah? So there's a very interesting teaching from Rabbeinu Bachye. Now, for those of you who might not like the exact way that he words this, not that we are entitled to an opinion against the words of the Rishonim, but nevertheless, just work with me here. Ko somar lebeis Yaakov, says Rabbeinu Bachye, Elu hanashim, this refers to the women. Ko somar b'lashon hakodesh, you should speak to them in the holy tongue. Ko somar, you should speak to them b'nachas, with gentleness. V'tziva ledaber el hanashim techila, and Moshe was instructed to go speak to the women first, lalamdam musar v'derech eretz, to teach them musar and derech eretz. What does that mean? Why? First of all, before we go to what does that mean, it's interesting. Rabbeinu Bachye is literally reading that Moshe was to gather all the women and speak to them first, and then gather the men. There isn't just the difference in the way that the Torah is to be related, but the women should actually be going first, and that's what Rabbeinu Bachye is trying to address. And he feels that giving over the Musar and the Derech Eretz, in other words, the morals of the Torah, to the women, that's the first step in the process. Va'od. And also to draw their hearts close to Torah and mitzvahs. But don't get too much into details with the women, because they're not going to want that kind of specific detail like the men, so just give them a general outline. Furthermore, says Rabbeinu Bachye, Ve'od sha'isha hatova hisiba laTorah. That, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the women are the key to the continuity of the Torah. Shehi yechola lahamshech hasbana lebeis hamidrash, because it's the mother who connects the child and brings her to the Beis Medrash. That love of Torah and of Judaism and of mitzvahs comes from the woman, because she is there at that time in the home. V'hi merachemes alav, and she has mercy on the child. B'kama mina gaguim, with a certain closeness and endearment that the father might not have. And therefore, that's the power of the mother to create this love of Torah. In order to bring the child close to Torah study while they're young. And then, if you become accustomed to connecting to Torah in a young age, that's easy to do than at an older age. Says Rabbeinu Bachye, and therefore, Re'uya ha'isha lehispalel l'Hashem yizbarach. It is appropriate that a woman should daven to Hashem b'shas hadlakas haner, when she lights the candles. Shel Shabbos, she mitzvah mutelas olav. This is a mitzvah that's upon her. She yitein laHashem banim meirim b'Torah. That Hashem should give her children who light up the world with their Torah. Rabbeinu Bachye is the source for that famous tefillah of the can which you make by Shabbos candles, and even though he doesn't have a full text, but the basic theme of this blessing, which is that Hashem should bless her with children who light up the world, he says this should be done because ki hatfila yoser nishmas b'shas asiyas ha-mitzvah, because there's a special effect that a prayer can have at the time of the performance of a mitzvah. U'b'zechus ner Shabbos. So in the merit of the Shabbos candles, shehu or, which is the light, Tizke lebanim bali Torah, she will merit children who are Torah scholars, Hanikras Or, because the Torah is also referred to as light. Shenamar, as it says, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah Or. He then goes on to quote the Gemara in Shabbos that tells us that the reward for someone who is careful with Shabbos candles is children who are Torah sages or other family members who are Torah sages. The point is that it's through the power of the Shabbos candles that you can pray specifically for the continuity of the Jewish people. Which means, says Rabbi Bachya, Hashem is saying to Moshe, before we can have the process of the giving of the Torah, we need to get the women on board. The women as the wives, and more so, says Rabbi Bachya, the women as the mothers. If they're not ready, then there's nowhere to go. The Jewish people need that part of them, that is the battery that's powering the Jewish people, and we first, Kosomar Lebeis Yaakov, go speak to the women and make sure that they understand their role in the creation of the love and connection to the Torah, and then once we have that, then the Jewish people, the rest of the Jewish people, can be offered the Torah. It's an interesting thing. And it's even more striking by the fact that this is the first statement made to Moshe. Hashem says, before he says anything else, I want you to know that you're going to have a conversation with the women, and if they don't receive the Torah, I'm not sure what's going to happen. You have to get them on board, make sure that they are ready to help transmit the Torah. After this comes the process of preparing for the giving of the Torah, followed by the actual Ma'amad Har Sinai, where Hashem gives us the Aseres Adibros, the Ten Commandments. And we're told in the Ten Commandments, you can see it inside page 410, but everyone knows this by heart. Zachor es yom ha-Shabbos l'kacho. Remember the day of Shabbos to sanctify it. Says Rashi, Zachor v'shamor b'dibur echad ne'emru. He says Rashi is bothered by the problem, which we haven't seen this problem yet, because we haven't seen the end of the Torah. But if you would fast forward to the end of the Torah, you would see that there's another account of the Aseres Adibros, and there instead of the word Zachor, the word Shomor is used. So Rashi, for some reason, feels the need that he has to already explain that here, and throws out the famous statement of our sages that Zachor and Shamor was said b'dibur echad in one statement. Anyone who's a student of the Chumash knows that this isn't the first change between the first version of the Ten Commandments and the later version of the Ten Commandments. There's some other differences, and of course each of the differences needs to be explained. Each of the differences needs to be elaborated upon. Why are there even any differences at all? Is it Hashem's version and then Moshe's recounting? Is it the first Luchos and then the second Luchos? You've got all kinds of explanations. But why is this the place where Rashi feels that now, when we've seen Zachor es yom ha-Shabbos l'kacho, here Rashi says, by the way, you should know that there is another Shamor, there's another version, but Zachor v'Shamor v'dibur echad nemru, they were both stated at the same time, so one place will recount the way that Hashem said it, and the other one will recount the other way that Hashem said it. Why is this the first correction made? So it is interesting that the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles, Rabbeinu Bachya feels, is the true expression of the role of the women in the Jewish people. As if to say, the reason why Moshe has to first speak to the Jewish people is because, first speak to the Jewish women, is because unless they are going to take the responsibility to inspire the children to be interested in Torah, there's no point. And Rabbeinu Bachya says that that's through the Shabbos candles, which will help explain why the mitzvah is, quoted in Shulchan Aruch, Reish Samach Gimel, really it's from the Torah, but this is in the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles. Yehei Za'ir Lasos Ner Yafa, says the Shulchan Aruch. You have to be careful to make the candles beautiful. You want the Shabbos lights to burn nicely. You don't want it to be flickering or going out in the middle. Make sure it burns well. V'yesh mechavnen, and there are those who are careful, lasos shtei psilos, to put 2 wicks. He's referring to in those days when they just had an oil lamp with a wick sticking out of it. So for Shabbos they would make 2 wicks. Why? Echad keneged zachor, ve'echad keneged shamor. Because when it comes to Shabbos, we need to commemorate both the zachor and the shamor. Why is it that for Shabbos we have to look at both versions of the Aseres HaDibros and do something in the mitzvahs of Shabbos that remind us, please, I know you're going to hear in the laning in this week's Parsha Zachor, but don't make the mistake that it's just Zachor. You better remember the Shamor as well. And the same thing there. Everyone knows the famous story about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai when he came out of the cave, and they were pretty upset when they saw, because they had in the cave reached this very, very lofty level, and they saw people were involved in work, and people were going about with their daily lives, and they couldn't handle how people could abandon the true purpose in the world, which is to serve Hashem, and busy themselves, and they were causing a lot of distress and destruction. And the heavenly voice rings out and says, have you come out to destroy my world? Get back in the cave. And so they went back in the cave for a year. Shimon Bar Yochai says even the greatest sinners are punished for no longer than a year. And after they came out, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is actually okay. He's able to respect people and where they're holding. But his son, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, is still too angry for the sake of Hashem, and he's still causing this harm. He still can't understand that. People who are wasting their time on things they don't need to be doing. And they go about the world, Rabbi Elazar burning everything, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai fixing it. Until it's Friday afternoon, it's right before Shabbos, and they see an old Jew running with 2 bundles of myrtle. And they say to him, what's the myrtle for? So he says, for Shabbos, we smell myrtle at the Friday night meal, which is still the custom of the Sephardim and of many Hasidim as well. So he says, okay, well that's great, but what do you have 2 bundles for? So he looks at them and says, what do you mean? One's for Zachor and one's for Shamor. And the Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says to his son, he says, do you see these people who you're looking at them and saying, well, why can't they focus? Look at him. Look how much they love the mitzvahs. He went and got 2 bundles, one for Zachor and one for Shamor. And then it was all better. The world was now a rosy, peachy place. Why? Because someone had 2 bundles of myrtle, one for Zachor and one for Shamor. In order to discuss this, I'd like to take us into a very deep place. Into a place which is maybe deeper than we should be delving. And we've alluded to some of these ideas before. But again, I apologize, and please ask me to elaborate on anything that isn't clear, unless I'm not elaborating, because I wouldn't be able to. There is a name of Hashem. The name of Hashem, which a few weeks ago, Hashem says to Moshe that this is the name which I appear to the Avos. And that's, along with the name Kel, the name Shakai. That name, Shin, Daled, and Yud, is one of the holy names of Hashem. And we discussed in that class a number of weeks ago that that name is specifically associated with restriction and control. In fact, our sages tell us, the Gemara in Chagiga, that when God first created the world, He said, let there be a world, let there be a creation, and amazingly, the Gemara uses the word, the world, the universe was expanding in speed and in greatness like a ball of yarn rolling open. Which is incredible, because if someone would have said that in a scientific world thousands of years ago, they would have said, you're crazy, that's not how the world came to be. Of course, today, it's amazing that modern scientists, whether or not they're agreeing with the approach of the sages, but they actually came up with this expanding universe as well. Until Hashem said, die. Enough. And the universe stopped. Stopped expanding, stopped growing. There was a limit. And of course, those who know science well today will know that the scientists do agree that the universe isn't infinite in every sense of that word, but the universe itself, just they claim, it continues to expand, and that's counter to our sages, but the idea that there is beyond the universe, because Hashem did not allow the universe to expand further, that certainly 2,000 years ago would have been beyond the knowledge of anyone. Back to our world. That attribute of Hashem, as we've explained many times, the names of Hashem are the attributes by which He interacts with this world. That name of Hashem, where Hashem puts limitations and controls, that's the attribute of the name Shakai. We mentioned a few weeks ago that that's the name on the mezuzah, because the mezuzah is the protection to keep out the destructive forces from the home, and so that we daven to Hashem that the midah of Sha'amar La'olam Odai, who puts limits and restrictions on the world, should limit those external factors, those forces of destruction, from being able to enter the home. That's why Shakai, Shin Daled Yud, is the first letters of the words Shomer Dalsos Yisrael. Hashem protects the doors of the Jewish people, because that's the name. That name is also associated in the holy books with peace. It's a little bit complex on how exactly it's connected with peace, but let me try to say it in terms which I can understand them. There is the midah of Yisod. We talk about during the seven Sephiros, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, and Malchus, whatever those terms mean. But the attribute of Yisod, or foundation, please don't understand this literally, but it's a metaphor, represents the attribute of Hashem by which everything is channeled to come down into the world based on limits. Let me explain what that means. The attribute of Hashem's chesed is giving, giving, giving. That is what Hashem gives through the attribute of chesed. The attribute of gevura is limiting, restricting, withholding, severity, judgment, punishment. That's the midas hadin. And we know that there's a balance. Tiferes, the beauty, the harmony, rachamim, mercy, all these terms are associated with that balance. And there is a process by which the influence of Hashem comes down into the world. Eventually, before it comes to us, it passes through the Yisod, the foundation. And there is the final line through which everything comes out. It's almost like the opening of the tube. Or even though everything up till then may be wider, that point is a very narrow opening, and only what's supposed to come out comes out. And that midah of Yisod, that control, is the place where all the judgments are restricted and contained. That's the place where everything is balanced and exactly what's supposed to happen to us happens. As we discussed last week, there really is nothing bad that ever happens to us. Everything that happens to us is for the good. Everything which comes down into the world is for the good. Except based on who I am, that's the kind of good that needs to come down to me. Based on the way the world is, that's the kind of good that needs to come down to me. Based on the people around me and their free will, that's the kind of good that needs to come down to me. And all that is channeled through the midah of Yisod, which is related to the name Shakai, which is restriction and control and definition. And the holy books tell us that that place is the place called Shalom. that's the place of peace. Because that's the place where all the different factions and forces all become one, and they become finalized, and they give in one specific way. The Shabbos candles are connected to that attribute, to the attribute of Shakai, to the attribute of control, except in a different way. What's the best way to fight fire?
What's fire?
Well, typically, what do we use? Water. But what happens when water can't fight fire?
Baking powder.
What if the fire is too big?
Take away the oxygen.
How? Right? So you were saying, fight fire with fire. When a fire is so powerful that they can't control it, you know what they do?
Make another fire.
Make another fire. They burn down all the trees all around in a controlled fire. And then they put it out. Because when something is beyond anything that you can handle, typically you don't have to go to its opposite. Because water will put out fire. This is the business. That's it. Fire will control and stop fire, and the same is true in the spiritual realm. There are forces in the world that want to cause destruction. They are represented by the fire. In fact, the most destructive place in the whole universe, or multiverse, is Gehenna. It is the place of the most suffering, and that's a place which we associate with fire. But fire isn't necessarily a bad thing. Fire could be used to warm, and fire could be used to bring light. The Shabbos candles is to take all the severity and all the judgment that exists in the world and to channel it into a place of peace. To channel it into a place of light and to channel it into a place of warmth. There are 39 malachos in the Torah. Very few of them are mentioned specifically in the Torah. One of them is Lo Savaru Eish B'chol Moshvosechem. You shall not kindle a fire in all your homes. And the Zohar says that, you know why this one is specifically mentioned? Because there's a deeper meaning in that verse. Lo Savaru Eish B'chol Moshvosechem means don't let a fire burn inside of you. And the Zohar says that even though you're never supposed to get angry, but getting angry on Shabbos is a very, very bad thing. A very bad thing. Because on Shabbos there's no judgment. On Shabbos there's no severity. In the heavenly courts, they shut down Gehenna. It's shut down for the day. That's why they say you should try to keep Shabbos as long as you can, because after Shabbos everyone goes back to Gehenna. So what time do you go back to Gehenna? So whatever time you kept Shabbos until, that's how long you get off of Gehenna. So if you keep the later Zman, it's good, unless you're pretty sure that you're not going to Gehenna, in which case you're safe. Then you don't need to worry about it. Anyway, but below fire represents strife and difficulty. Our sages tell us that there's no greater danger of difficulty and strife within the home than right before Shabbos. There's a special force that tries to bring machlokas right before Shabbos, and that's a power, that's the destructive force of fire in the world. The Shabbos candles, their job is to take all that fire, all that force for severity and destruction, and to channel it, to contain it and to control it, to make it into a symbol of beauty, of light, and of warmth. The Shabbos candles are specifically given to the women to do that mitzvah, because as we were just told by Rabbeinu Bachye, in order to bring the love of Torah, the love of mitzvahs to the world, you specifically need the women of the Jewish people, and not just in their home. When a woman, even if a woman is lighting just for herself, that brings light to the entire world and changes everyone in the world, assuming that she has the ability to bring down the proper channels by doing the mitzvah for the right reasons. The fire of the candles therefore becomes the fire of peace and the fire of joy, and containing that harshness and severity. Our sages tell us, you remember when the universe was expanding and Hashem said stop, how much did it expand? So we're not going to quote the Gemara, because we wouldn't understand what the Gemara means anyway. But basically, the Gemara says that it expanded to the extent of 500 years. 500 years what? We don't know. 500 years. But that's only until this level. But then there's another space of 500 years between the bottom of these angels and the ankles of those angels. And then there's another 500-year space between the ankles of those angels and the bodies of the... Gemara goes into this very, very difficult, esoteric, very difficult to understand unless you know all the secrets of the world. But the Gemara keeps repeating the number 500. And Tosafos, one of the commentaries, one of the medieval commentators on the Gemara, says, what's with the number 500? Where is 500? How does that come? Why is that the appropriate number? So this is not a complicated math, but it is math. So says Tosfos, because what was the name, the attribute that Hashem used to tell the world stop? It was the name Shakai. Shakai is spelled Shin, followed by a Daled, followed by a Yud. Now we know that a Shin itself is made up of 3 letters. A Shin, a Yud, and a Nun. As we know that every gematria is not just the simple gematria. So let's take, for example, the word Beged, Beis Gimel Daled, which has a very small numerical value of 9, 2, 3, 4. But the base itself is pronounced base Yud Taf. So the base itself is 412. The Gimel is another, you're talking about 83, and the Dalet is another 434. So the actual numerical value of the word Beged is huge. But that's not the true gematria of the word Beged, because each of those letters itself can be expanded. So when we talk about the value of, let's say, of a person, based on their numerical value, that's only if you look at one level. If you look deeper, the person's value is expanded, and if you look even deeper, it's expanded further, and it increases exponentially. If you take the name Shin, Daled, and a Yud, the extra letters of the Shin after the Shin are Yud and Nun, which is the numerical value of 60. Then if you have the Daled followed by a Lamed and a Taf, which is 430, gives you 490. And then the Vav and the Daled of the Yud gives you 500. So when Hashem says, die, meaning Hashem invoked the attribute of Shakai, of say to the world enough, it was the letters inside of that name which put the limit and the amount on the world. And that's why the world stops at 500. 500 years between this world and the next world, 500 years between this world and that world, whatever that means, but the number is 500 because that's the number within the name Shakai.
I was wondering if anyone's ever calculated, let's say, putting it into 500 light years and adding all them up that the Gemara says and see how that compares with what we...
That would be interesting. That would be interesting to do. It's interesting because it does use years, and where do we use years as a measurement? And that's an interesting point to do. I wonder if someone could do that. But of course, we've chosen to use the speed of light because we consider that to be the greatest possible speed. Beyond the greatest possible speed, it is true movement, or without getting into
Well, light is
astrophysics,
actually
but
the distance.
right.
that
So, but because the speed of light
here.
is the most speed before you start time traveling, so that's why they pick that number, and then they measure it based on how much it travels in a year, right?
I think Gerald Shore did a book about this actually, with some measurements, whatever.
But did he take into consideration that Gemara and Chagiga?
He might have.
Maybe,
You know,
okay.
Sure, it was above me, so I forgot. But like,
Okay.
he's written some scar about it.
So listen to this, because this is deep stuff. The Sefer Siduro Shel Shabbos, which is a beautiful sefer written by one of the greatest of the Hasidic masters, Reb Chaim of Chernovitz, who lived in Sfas. It's called Siduro Shel Shabbos, which is the book of Shabbos, or the Siddur of Shabbos. But it is considered by many to be the greatest book in terms of allowing a person to access the next level of what Shabbos is. To understand what each of the mitzvahs of Shabbos, what are you trying to do on Shabbos. And in many, many communities, the Sefer Siddur Shel Shabbos is studied by groups of people before Shabbos davening or on Friday nights, because it is an incredible sefer, just in terms of the effect. Now, he doesn't need my approbation. I'm just saying in terms of the effect that I've seen it have on those people who have studied the sefer.
Is it in English?
It is not available in English. No one has yet dared to do so, but I'm sure that at some point someone will undertake that. So he says that if we could only know, if we would realize, if we would appreciate the greatness of what is happening when you light Shabbos candles, we would be so fired up, pun intended, in its observance. It would change our lives every time we would do it. And he explains, and I've shared some of this before in the class, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's important to review these things. He explains like this. And the first part is a little bit above my head, so I'm just going to say it without much explanation, but the rest of it I think can be understood by all of us. We're told that the main name of Hashem, by which Hashem interacts with the world, is the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. That is most of the names that appears in the Torah, and as we use in our davening, and as we see Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Samid, that's the name that we perceive. But as we've discussed in previous classes, there are other names of Hashem, the highest of which is the name Ekiyeh, Aleph Hey Yud Hey, which is the name which Hashem gave to Moshe when he said, "Go tell my people that they are going to be redeemed." Moshe says, "Well, what should I say to them?" So first he says Ekiyeh Ekiyeh, then he says, "Well, that's mentioning other exiles." Hashem just says Ekiyeh. That's, as we said in that class, that's one of the highest names of Hashem, because it is Hashem beyond our understanding. Because Hashem says, "I am," or "I will be what I will be." Ekiyeh, Lashon future, Lashon Asid in the future, because we do not yet understand. It is the name which is beyond us. There's another name associated with severity and judgment in an upper realm, and that's the name Elokim. And then you have the name Adoshem, Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, which is the name which we say instead of saying the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Those names, all three of them, are associated in a certain way with judgment. I will be. Right now you don't understand what's going on. But one day in the future you will understand. Elokim is judgment. And Adoshem, Hashem's, that's the sovereignty, the mastership of Hashem is judgment. And even in the word Adoshem, Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, you have the word Din. There are forces in the world, through Hashem's will, that there should be difficulty in the world. But if you take the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, which represents mercy, and you connect it to the name Ekiyeh, and then you take the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, and in your mind you connect it to the name Elokim, And then you take the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, and in your mind you connect it with the name Aleph Daled Nun Yud. You have just made three connections between Yud Kei Vav Kei and the highest name, Yud Kei Vav Kei and the middle name, Yud Kei Vav Kei and the lowest name. And again, I'm just repeating this. We'll get to more comprehensible stuff next. What happens is, when you've made those three levels of connection, Havaya Ekia is 26 and 21, which is 47. Havaya Elokim is 2686, which is 112. And Havaya Adoshem is 26 and 65, which is 91. Add that together. 47 and 112 gives you 159 plus 91 should get you 250. That's the word ner. Ner is 250. Because when you light a ner, you are creating the connection. You are channeling all of that, all those what we call yuchudim, unifications, between the names associated with din and the names associated with mercy. You put those together, all of them, and you get 250, and that's the word ner. But that's only half the universe. That's only 250. That's why you need two candles. Two candles, 2 times 250, which is 500. That doesn't just fix half the universe, that fixes the entire universe. That channels the name Shakai. 2 times Ner is 500, because the universe expanded to 500 through the name Shakai, which is the name of the limitation of severity in the world. That's the name you put on the mezuzah. That's what you're doing when you're lighting Shabbos candles. The names of Hashem, so to speak, are connected to the Shabbos candles when you light these 2 candles. One Keneged Zachor and one corresponding with Shamor. When you light those candles, you are channeling so much sweetness and mercy in the world to drive away all the horrible suffering that's going on in the world. And why is there still suffering? Maybe we need more people, more women lighting Shabbos candles. Maybe that's what we need. There was a great rabbi who lived in the 20th century who made it his life mission to try to get every woman in the world to light Shabbos candles for a reason, because that the lighting of the Shabbos candles channels the mercy and sweetness and fixing of all the judgments in the world.
It's interesting, but when you did this gematria, you had Kevavke, Elohim, and Ekia, but you didn't have Shakai in there.
Right, because those are the 3 levels of connection. Shakai is the culmination, or that's getting into complicated. But the yichudim is the unifications of these names, because they correspond to each other. I can't say more than that. But this is the secret of the Shabbos candles, which are a fixing of the world. Our sages teach us that there are 248 positive commandments, corresponding to 248 limbs. So I'll let you in on a little secret that our sages also tell us, that the 248 limbs are only for men. In fact, women, this is the Sidur Shabbos quotes from the holy books, have 252 limbs, based on how it breaks up with the different, getting into specifics of it, of course, but our sages tell us that for women it's 252 limbs.
You must be talking about internal
Yes.
body things
Yes.
as well, because
Yeah.
it's certainly not 200.
Right. No, it has to do with the internal structure. Absolutely.
Okay.
But limbs is not just outer limbs. So that's what our sages say. So he says, because the universe is 500. So there's 248 of the men, 252 of the women, making for a total within each micro or macro universe, depending on which direction you're going, but each miniature universe is 500 limbs. Because when Hashem told the world to expand, it expanded until He said, die. And when He said, die, enough, it stopped at 500. So, but there's an imbalance. There's an imbalance because it isn't 250 and 250. Which is why it is the custom. This is all from the Siddur Shabbos. It is the custom throughout the Jewish communities that the man or the husband will prepare the Shabbos candles. Will prepare the Shabbos candles to set them up, to prepare the wicks, to char the wicks, to make them more easily burnt. And then, when he makes Kiddush, he's supposed to look at the Shabbos candles, because the man needs to join in and take a part in the mitzvah of the Shabbos candles. Even though he doesn't have custody of that mitzvah, it is in the hands of the women. But nevertheless, the man needs to take a part of it and do those preparations. And when he does that, when it becomes a partnership, even though technically in limbs the man is too short, meaning right, but in when they form that partnership, that 250, the ner and the ner, representing the man and the woman, that creates in the universe this balance between Zachar and Shamar. So it may seem like the men are somewhat at a disadvantage. However, we've mentioned many times in this class that almost every deep teaching in the Torah is going to take us back to the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, our sages tell us, Hi kavsa neru shel olam, that Chava is considered to be the one who extinguished the light of the world. And as much as women are on a higher level in terms of these things, and as Rabbi Bachye explained, that they are the ones who are able to fix the world in this way, nevertheless, that is the role in the woman, the sin in the Garden of Eden, that Hi kavsa ner shel olam, she put out the light of the world, and therefore she has to relight that light. Which means that we're considering the Shabbos candles not just to be some light in the home. The Shabbos candles are the relighting of the light of the world. The Shabbos candles are bringing back the peace of the imbalance which exists within each little universe of each home, and that exists in the universe at large. The fixing of the world is dependent upon the understanding that we are in a world which is broken, that we are in a world which is imbalanced, that we are in a world that has a confusion of tov and ra, of good and evil. And during the week, we have a lot of difficulty sorting and differentiating between the good and the evil. During the week, we have to pick and choose what we do. But on Shabbos, we're not allowed to do borer. We're not allowed to take the bad from the good. We can only take the good from the bad. Because on Shabbos, we're not confused about what's tov and what's ra. On Shabbos, we know what's tov and we take only it. We don't touch those poison apples, which we would during the week. And many people wonder why we have this malacha of borer, of picking and choosing. How could that be a malacha? I remember I was once giving a class, and I was looking for an example of a malacha on Shabbos that people aren't, that's really complicated and people aren't really aware of all the details. So I said, such as the malacha of borer, where it has so many intricate details about what you can pick and choose and how you should do it. And a religious person, been religious all their life, raised their hand and said, what is borer? And many of the people who attended that class felt a little awkward because someone was asking a question which seemingly they should know. And that's not right. It's not right. We shouldn't feel awkward because almost nobody knows the laws of Boris. They know a little bit less than us. So no one should be embarrassed about that. You have to ask questions. Lo abai shalom. But the point is, it's so not a work in terms of exertion and of, so what does that mean? If I have a pile of lettuce and there's a bad leaf and I tear off the bad leaf and I throw it in the garbage, that's liable for the death penalty? And so many people have trouble with this kinds of thing and they don't understand. But if you know that you didn't just pull a bad leaf off of a bundle of lettuce, you just repeated the sin in the Garden of Eden. You went to a place of bad on Shabbos. How could you go to a place of bad, to a place of anger, to a place of rage on Shabbos? That's the undoing of the light of the world. The Shabbos candles represent that on Shabbos we are in this state of peace and serenity, and there is no anger in the world. There is no judgment. There is no severity. Gehenna shuts down. So that little act of going to the lettuce and pulling off the bad brown lettuce and throwing it in the garbage is to miss. So if you still think it's not a big deal, maybe we need to work better on understanding the Kedusha of Shabbos. But if we would, obviously it's difficult, the laws of Bora. I'm just saying if you don't recognize how something like that could be a big deal, then you need to study more and understand.
So why are we characterizing it pulling the bad leaf off of the head of lettuce instead of pulling the good head of lettuce off of the bad leaf?
Oh, you can do that. You can hold the bad leaf and pull the good towards you. That's taking the good from the bad. That it really is the direction and the focus which you're taking it in. So that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do it by hand, not with a utensil. You have to do it for immediate use, and you have to take the good from the bad.
And what do you do with the bad piece?
Well, once you got it in your hand, now you could throw it in the garbage because you're not separating it anymore. It's already separate. So, and it's all about that. It's about getting yourself focused that on Shabbos, I'm taking only the good. And the same thing, the Jewish women, especially when it comes to Shabbos, they understood these things. And they saw that people were eating the fish and they had these bones in the fish. And it's difficult because you have to pull the fish towards you and you can't have... So what did the women do? They said, enough of this. Put the whole thing in a grinder and make gefilte fish. And gefilte fish is a result of the women wanting to create a higher level of observance of Shabbos by no longer having bones in the fish. That's why gefilte fish is eaten everywhere, because it is an expression of our desire to perform the mitzvahs. And today they even have Sephardim eating gefilte fish somewhere. Right? I heard there was someone recently once say that gefilte fish is Mashiach's food, because when you see Sephardim eating gefilte fish, at that point Mashiach has to come. But
Some of us have to put horseradish on it.
right. Well, there's a special mitzvah, maybe we'll talk about it another time, about having beets on Shabbos, which is why they have horseradish. Yeah. So they put it in the horseradish for that reason.
Oh, yeah? That's the reason I thought it was to sweeten up the horseradish.
Why would you, at the beginning of Shabbos, just as Shabbos is starting, in your beautiful white shirt and everyone's white clothing, take the food which does the most staining and put that on the first food you eat in your meal, as if to say, before you make it to the soup, that shirt is already going to need to be changed. So if it's not for some spiritual reason, it would not have been done.
So Pshita, you should have beets with horseradish as opposed to white horseradish.
Yes, I would certainly recommend you should have that. If you want to fulfill the words of our sages who recommend eating beets on Shabbos.
Why? Beets?
It has spiritual connotations. Maybe at some point we'll talk about it.
But you're allowed to wear bibs.
You're also allowed to, and maybe that's why you have to wear a tie, because the tie...
Ties will grow up.
What? So the tie is just to keep the beets off the shirt. Right, okay. Yeah, okay. So
We had an offbeat class tonight.
So all of this, everything that I just said, is all included in the statement of Zachor v'Shamor. Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur achad ne'amru. As we're told that the Jewish people, when they stood at Har Sinai, Hashem spoke the first commandment, and the Jewish people died. Their souls left them. And the Gemara tells us God brought back the tal, the dew of the Tchias HaMesim, and brought the Jewish people back, and then God gave the second commandment. And they died again. At that point they turn to Moshe and they say, we can't take it anymore, you speak to us. And the rest of the commandments was Hashem speaking through the voice of Moshe. So why did Hashem have the Jewish people die twice? And the answer is, because as we're told, that the first commandment, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, includes within it all the positive commandments. And the second commandment, Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim, you shall not have any other gods, that includes within it all the negative commandments. And therefore, as much as we say the 10 Commandments includes the 613, the first two include all 10. The first two include the 248 and the 365. The positive commandments are associated with the masculine aspect, and the feminine commandments are associated, the negative commandments are associated with the feminine aspects. Not men and women, but masculine and feminine. That is, giving and receiving, the side of chesed and the side of gevura, all these associations which would require a whole class in order to explain. But the point is that they're both true. They're both necessary. There is a zachor, which, by the way, zachor is clearly related to the masculine because the word zachor and the word zachar are actually related. And then there's the shamor, the observance, which is the greater, which is more connected and is more likely to be kept by the women. That's why the men have all these restrictions in the world of shamor, starting with the yarmulke, this custom to have this constant reminder, and ranging all the way to these mitzvahs that only apply to men because they need to be able to have also this connection to shamor. But the point is that zachor and shamor connect to the positive aspect of Shabbos, meaning the observance of Shabbos in terms of all. And then there's the shamor, which refers to the observance of the malachos of Shabbos. And we're told, specifically in that place, that Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad ne'amru, that we have to bring together those things. We have to bring together the ava and the yira, the love and the fear, the positive and the negative, the remembrance and the observance. All that needs to come together through the connections between the side of mercy and the side of severity, all channeled through the name Shaka. You know how that happens? All that, the Anochi Hashem Elokecha and Lo yeh lecha, everything is contained within that simple act of the lighting the Shabbos candles. So before Hashem even begins the process, He says, I want you to know that I'm going to give you the Torah. But if we don't have those people who are back, the people who are returned from the Garden of Eden, specifically the women, the feminine gender, if they are not ready to take the responsibility of being the driving force behind the continuity of the Torah amongst the Jewish people, then they won't survive more than a few generations. And that's why Rabbi Bachya says, Koso mar lebeis Yaakov, this is what you should say to the house of Yaakov, to the women, that they have this obligation to transmit the Torah in that way. And therefore, says Rabbeinu Bachya, the women should take the time, at the time of the lighting of the candles, and pray for the fixing of the world, for the illumination of the future generations. That is the first statement, the opening statement of the Jewish people. We just came off of the section of the Torah that describes all the mitzvahs related to Yetzias Mitzrayim, to the Exodus. And we explained there that that's associated with the mezuzah because that is Hashem protecting and the creation of the Jewish people. That continues to this day through the mitzvah of Shabbos candles. And that's why it says in the holy writings that when a person enters the home on Friday night, they're supposed to say the words Shabbos Shalom U'Mavorach or Shabbat Shalom U'Mavorach. It should be a peaceful and blessing-filled Shabbos. And one of the commentaries says, I don't understand why everyone doesn't do this. When you enter the home, you're supposed to say Shabbos Shalom U'Mavorach, and many Zemiras have it. Some want to say that since the first song we're going to sing is Shalom Aleichem, that's considered an observance of that expectation. But what's more important is that we should understand Lo Matza Kadosh Baruch Hu Kli Machzik Bracha the Yisrael. Hashem did not find a vessel that can contain peace, contain blessings for the Jewish people. Ela HaShalom, only peace. It is only through peace that the world can function. It is only through peace that there can be blessing in the home. And the challenges which exist at the beginning of Shabbos and at the end of Shabbos are meant specifically to challenge our ability to maintain the peace. And the Shabbos candles represent that. May we merit that through the observance of the mitzvahs, especially for the women, to channel that light into the world, to understand that both sides need to be fixed. There needs to be this creation of balance, not just in one individual home, but throughout the entire universe, with that we should merit to once again hear the voice of Hashem, and just like we heard the first time, we should hear again, Henga alti eschem acheris kereishis, and we should, Hashem should bring back, as the Medrash tells us, if you will light the Shabbos candles in your home, you will merit to see the light of Tzion. May it be soon.